Business group Sakelicha claims some alert level 2 regulations are still unreasonable and are still unconstitutional. The organization wants all business to be allowed to operate at full capacity. The government has permitted most sectors to reopen but has placed a limit on customer numbers. Sakelicha has written to Cooperative Governance Minister Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma urging her to amend the regulations. To discuss this further, I'm joined by the organization's CEO, Pete LaRue. Very good morning to you, Pete. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. What's of major concern? Give us a few examples of the regulations that are concerning you the most right now.
The regulations that concern us the most right now in the letter that we wrote to the Minister are the regulations that are incoherently limiting businesses for their activity, their ability to serve customers and receive clients. It's a mismatch, a hit-and-run story that the Minister gave us that sometimes limit businesses to 50 people, sometimes limit them to 50% of available floor space, sometimes give some businesses the right to do 100% of business, sometimes limits them completely. There's no rhyme or reason to it. Because it's so incoherent, we're saying that it's unequally discriminating between the freedoms of different businesses without any rationale behind it. And as such, it's unfair, unconstitutional, unreasonable, and we insist that she amend them.
But you have to, obviously, government is concerned about a possible resurgence of the virus. That's something that you have to acknowledge. And there have to be some sort of limitations to guard against that because we do not want to go back to a stricter lockdown level.
I think it's important to realize at this stage that the projections of deaths, the projections of the health risk of COVID-19 was out by at least an order of magnitude, and that is at least 10 times out. So that gives us a lot of leeway to reopen the economy. And if we don't, we're facing a humanitarian crisis. We're already facing one. We're just intensifying it as we go along, even at level 2. We're trying to separate the earning bread from eating bread. You can't do that. So now, of course, government has its health concerns, and governments all over the world have them. But what we find unacceptable with the way government's now approaching level 2 is that it's opening up discriminately between different businesses. Now, if there was a rule behind it that made sense, and then we could evaluate that rule. But there is no apparent single reason or rationale behind the decisions. It doesn't make sense to tell sporting events you're completely closed, no viewers, but you can tell casinos they can run at 50% of viewers. It doesn't make sense to tell bars and taverns you can be at full capacity up to 50 people, thereafter no percent, but you can fill buses and taxis 100%. These are all incoherent, and because it's so incoherent, it is it's unfair by itself and unconstitutional by itself.
Are you putting economic recovery ahead of the need to save lives?
No, I'm putting the need to save lives ahead of government's irrational regulations. If we continue in the way we're doing, we're preventing businesses from opening. By preventing businesses from opening, we're running into a humanitarian crisis in South Africa. We're running into political instability, social instability. We're running into people not getting medical treatment, not being able to afford to put food on their children's tables. There's no difference between economic recovery and saving lives. If we neglect economic recovery, we're going to see more people die than have so far died from COVID-19.
So you've written to the minister, and have you had a response yet? And if you don't get a response, what's your next step?
Yes, we received a response from the minister yesterday that requested an extension and time to reply to our letter. I think that is Tuesday or Wednesday next week. And now, of course, the minister, we find it unacceptable that the president and the minister can sometimes find the time to announce regulations without, with immediate effect. But I can't use 2 days to reply to our letter. Nevertheless, we will give her that time and then consider our options after that. I mean, many organizations, ours included, have considered and have undertaken, and we've been successful with some legal action. The problem is that the government does not, we think, legislate and regulate in good faith because they chop and change the regulations, and so this makes litigation extremely difficult, but it is always an option.
I mean, litigation at this point with lockdown level 2, and if you know, it's weird, it's odd to talk about positive numbers in a situation like this, a pandemic, but there is a little bit of positivity, and then we might head to lockdown level 1. It seems, even looking at litigation might be a pointless issue.
Look, it's not well, it might be pointless because government does not regulate in good faith, and in that sense. But it's still likely to encourage government to loosen up earlier, because we might even win if they extend the legislation, the regulation too much. And I'll give you a few examples of why it's urgently necessary to move away from level 2 and open all businesses. I'm not saying that people should not take precautions. That is exactly where we want to shift the responsibility to businesses and to customers and people to make their own judgments based on their risk profiles and the risk profiles of what they're doing. Now, some churches, for example, take 8,000 or 10,000 people, or hundreds of people at least. It's not worthwhile for those churches to open at 50 people. Or take gyms. It's not worthwhile for gyms that can take 1,000 people to open at 50 people. So you're actually keeping these people at level 3. And they might open just to try and serve their customers and save some reputation. But we're still driving all these businesses into loss-making territory. And we're keeping them there. And the longer we keep them there, the longer we're heading into this humanitarian disaster. I'm not saying humanitarian disaster lightly. I'm saying that there's no distinction between economic recovery and saving lives. The risks to life now from the economic crisis, if we don't recover, political instability, social instability, is much higher than we've seen with COVID. We're on the recovery path with COVID, and it's 10 times less than we thought it would be. It's time to open up the economy.
All right, thank you so much for speaking with us this morning, Peter Leroux, who's the CEO of Sakeliga, there's a business group that claims that some alert level 2 lockdown regulations are still unreasonable and unconstitutional.